Most detectives spend days building a case, but Patrick Jane only takes one good look and can already tell what's going on. So I decided to go over the fastest solved cases Patrick Jane has ever worked on. So in this episode, retired quarterback Doc Dugan appears to get blown up in his own SUV outside his bar in Sacramento, which sounds like a complicated murder mystery until Jane notices something off about the body at the scene and tracks Doc down alive in his apartment in literal seconds. Turns out, his assistant Jake was the one who had been in the vehicle, and Doc had faked the whole thing to avoid a subpoena from his ex-wife. From the first conversation he has with the two men closest to Doc, his manager Steve Penn and his agent Alex, Jane already has a working theory about who is responsible. Steve is a former player who spent decades in Doc's shadow, helping build someone else's legacy, while his own potential quietly went nowhere. And that specific combination of loyalty and buried resentment over years and years produces a psychological profile Jane recognizes immediately. The trap he builds is a fake evidence file about a bomber named Louis Boom, complete with a detailed physical description, left in an interview room where Steve is briefly unsupervised and has every opportunity to read it. The file also describes a planned lineup, so Steve knows exactly what to expect when it happens. When the lineup runs, Steve picks Louis Boom out of a group of total strangers because Jane's fabricated file told him precisely what to look for, and Steve had no idea he was reading bait the entire time. He confessed, and Jane had built the whole case backward from a gut read he formed within 5 minutes of the first conversation, needing nothing more than a single piece of paper Steve was never supposed to see. This one isn't as impressive, but it will keep getting crazier once we move up the list. This case on paper is about a missing banker named Jason Sands, whose home office has been turned upside down and who's been gone since the night before, reading initially like a kidnapping situation in progress. Jane walks through the scene, takes a look around, and already knows where the body is in 2 minutes. But the moment that truly solves everything comes at the funeral. Jane watches the widow receive condolences from the crowd, and he notices something odd. No wife should glow at her husband's funeral. Jennifer looks genuinely glowing standing next to her husband's casket, and that single observation becomes the key for everything that follows. What had actually happened was that Sands had converted $10 million into cash and diamonds to disappear with his mistress and take their daughter with him. Jennifer found out, and with the help of his own lawyer, Michael Bennett, she tortured Sands in their home, trying to get the location of the money. He managed to crawl into his panic room and bled out inside it. Jane confirms his suspicion with one test question. Since her alibi was that she was at a concert, he just asked Jennifer whether the duck in Peter and the Wolf is a flute or a bassoon, and she gets it wrong. A woman who had actually taken her daughter to that concert would know the answer without thinking about it. One observation at a funeral and one question about a concert, and Jane has the full case confirmed. But the next one is even more insane. A young woman named Melanie is found near a Napa vineyard. Jane steps up to the crime scene and within a few minutes has a complete profile ready. The killer is a local and relatively new to this and has attempted something like it once before, but without following through. That is a remarkable amount of detail to extract from a dump site in a matter of minutes, but the moment that actually identifies the killer comes even faster. Because at the winery restaurant where Melanie worked, Jane sits down with the owners Malcolm and Sandra, tastes the food Malcolm has prepared for the table, and makes one observation that closes the whole case. Jane said that the meal has too much butter, and based on that realizes who the killer is. His reasoning is that someone who indulges that heavily in cooking carries the same psychology into every other corner of their life, and Malcolm's relationship with excess tells Jane exactly what kind of person would do such things to someone weaker. He still has to set up the trap to catch him, but he knew right there and then that Malcolm was the killer. If Jane is exceptionally good at one thing, then it must be social engineering. In this episode, we meet Gary Philo, who is suspicious from the beginning. The victim was his employee, but there's nothing concrete that ties Gary to it yet. However, Jane knew from the beginning. Jane's immediate response to having no hard evidence is to say exactly the right combination of words to make Gary throw a punch at him. Which he does, of course. This gets Gary brought in for formal questioning, and Jane already knows they have their guy, but Gary is calculating in a way that makes him almost interrogation-proof, and he is clearly enjoying every minute of it, deflecting every approach, and at one point licking a file folder to offer extra DNA as a nasty joke. The team genuinely didn't know what to do at the time. Then Jane and Gary pass each other at the elevator on his way out and exchange what sounds like small talk. And Gary uses the exact Shakespearean greeting that had appeared in the victim's online chat history. Jane quotes Macbeth back at him with a deliberate error in the line, and Gary corrects it without thinking. And just like that, he exposes himself in a 30-second hallway exchange because his own arrogance would not allow a misquote to go uncorrected. But now let's get into the extremely fast ones. This one gets brought up in Mentalist fan communities on a fairly regular basis, and for the right reason. A baseball player's wife turns up dead, and Jane arrives at the scene, takes a look at the room and the player for a few seconds, and has the full picture before the rest of the team has even started questioning things. The player did it, and Jane is certain of that before anyone else is even considering him. He uses the player to reveal where he keeps his guns and removes the bullets from the player's gun and replaces them with peanuts right in front of his eyes. The player doesn't notice this at all. But Jane had already identified the killer, assessed the physical threat he represented, and decided to neutralize the weapon before the formal arrest had even started. He was essentially disarming a man the rest of the team was still treating as someone to interview. Then, the player falls for the bait and uses Jane as the human shield to go outside. Jane was telling them not to worry since there are peanuts in the gun so they can arrest the guy. However, the player had a second gun with him, and things go wild and it ends up with an officer getting shot. This one didn't go quite to plan, but Jane did solve the entire case in like few minutes as soon as he got inside. It's interesting to see how Jane just knows who the killer is from the get-go, and this seems to be common with each case we got coming up next. The pilot gives you 2 separate cases in one episode, and the first one is solved so fast. A teenage girl named Mercy Tolliver has been found murdered in her neighborhood, and a local boy who discovered her body is immediately treated as the primary suspect. Her parents are giving a press conference outside, and Jane walks past all of it, lets himself into the family home, makes himself a sandwich and a cup of tea, and sits down to wait for the mother to come back inside. He asks Mrs. Tolliver one question, which is whether she thinks her husband might have killed their daughter. Mrs. Tolliver hesitates in a way that confirms everything. She recalls her husband and their daughter behaving strangely around each other the year before, mentions that her daughter had tried to tell her something she had not understood in time, and the picture assembles itself right there in that kitchen. When Mr. Tolliver walks in and Jane asks him directly whether he killed his daughter, Tolliver's response is to threaten lawyers and promise to make Jane's life very difficult. But Mrs. Tolliver had already put it together by then, and shot her husband through the chest before the conversation could continue. Jane solved the first murder of the show by making himself a snack, asking one carefully aimed question, and let the others do the rest. Season 2 opens at a department store where someone has been murdered, and the officer running the scene takes the first opportunity to tell Jane he has no interest in psychic nonsense, at which point Jane is already crouching over the body. He leans in, takes a single breath, and starts talking before anyone has asked him anything. The victim was a ladies' man who specifically targeted wealthy, older women, and a person who did not play guitar particularly well and worked somewhere in the creative industry. And Jane has all of that before he has exchanged a single word with anyone present in the room. He moves through the group of detainees, giving each person a quick observation as he passes, until he reaches Mandy Schultz, wife of a local council member, and tells her she is going to lead them to the murder weapon. She finds this completely ridiculous and agrees immediately to prove him wrong. He reads her physical reactions as they move through the store together and uses them to locate the weapon. A piece of bloodied glass that had been tucked neatly back into its original packaging inside a stack of identical boxes. However, that was a trick, and he was actually following the reactions of the other people that were looking at them. Turns out, the killer was a store clerk whose wife had been having an affair with the victim, and that was the complete motive. Jane solved this one in few minutes with a simple trick and didn't even have to try. And then there is one case left that we have been building toward the entire time. The 6th season finale opens mid-case, with Jane and Cho working a murder involving a group of college students. This is when Jane realized that Teresa is leaving for Washington with her fiancé Marcus Pike, so Jane apparently tries to rush this case as fast as possible so he can get back to Teresa. He basically enters the room full of students and figures out that they all did it together. Every single one of them collectively killed their roommate. He managed to solve the entire case in literal seconds without asking much questions, while being distracted by Teresa. It's honestly one of the best episode openers in the entire show. Now, what makes this the most staggering case on the entire list is what it says about every other episode that came before it. Jane operating at half capacity, emotionally distracted, running on urgency rather than focus, still wraps a group murder before most people have finished reading the initial report. By the way, I know I haven't been active in the past few months, but guys, it's been a crazy year for me. However, I'm coming back. Subscribe for a lot more Mentalist content and comment below any ideas you'd like to see me explore next. I'll catch you guys up in the next one.